When she was only 6 years old, she gave up the single thing that kept her alive. The icy winter winds cut through the wooden walls like a blade, and little Lily Mae Whitmore clutched her threadbare blue blanket tighter around her small body. But when she saw that tiny native child turning pale in his mother's desperate arms, something in her young soul sparked a choice that would change everything. The blizzard had raged without pause for 3 days straight, trapping everyone inside the humble trading post on the frontier's edge. Samuel Whitmore paced nervously by the fireplace, his weathered hands clenched into fists as he watched the snow pile higher against the windows. His wife Elena sat on a wooden crate, trying to warm their daughter with the little heat their dying fire could provide. Through the frozen window, they could see the small group of native people who had taken shelter under the building's eaves. The tribal woman held her baby close, but even from inside, they could see the child barely moving. The infant's lips had turned a frightening shade of blue, and his mother's face showed the kind of desperate grief that transcends all language. Lily Mae pressed her small face to the cold glass. Her breath fogged the surface as she watched. The baby seemed so still, so quiet. She thought about her own chill, even with her blanket, and imagined how much colder that little infant must be with only thin cloth around him. "Mama," she whispered, tugging at Elena's worn dress. "That baby is so cold." Elena looked toward the window and felt her heart squeeze tight. She had seen that look before, a mother watching her child slip away, powerless to stop it. But Samuel had been clear. They couldn't risk getting involved with the native people. "Too risky," he had said. "Too complicated." "I know, sweet child," Elena whispered back, pulling Lily Mae closer. "But there's nothing we can do." Still, Lily Mae kept watching that baby. She observed as a native woman tried to protect him with her own body, watched as she breathed on his tiny hands for warmth. The baby's cries had grown weaker throughout the day, and now he made almost no sound at all. Samuel walked to the window and jerked the curtain shut. "Stop looking," he ordered sternly. "We need to worry about our own family." Lily Mae felt her father's terror, but she also felt something else, something that made her chest tight and her eyes burn. She looked down at her blue blanket, the one her grandmother had made before she died, the one that kept her warm every night, the one that smelled like home and safety. The trading post owner, a rough man named Morrison, had already made it clear that the native people weren't allowed inside. They could wait out the storm under his roof's overhang. But that was all the charity he was willing to offer. He mumbled something about not wanting trouble with either side. As night fell, the temperature dropped even more. Lily Mae could hear the wind screaming like something wild and angry. She pulled her blanket up to her chin and tried to sleep on the hard floor where her family had made their bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she shut her eyes, she saw that baby's blue lips, hers faint cries getting quieter and quieter. In the darkness, she could hear her parents whispering urgently to each other. Her father's voice was tight with worry, her mother's soft with what sounded like prayer. They were scared too, she realized, scared of the storm, scared of running out of food, scared of what might happen if they didn't reach the next town before their supplies ran out. Lily Mae turned over and listened to the wind. Somewhere outside, just feet away through the wall, a baby was dying, a baby who looked different from her, whose mother spoke words she couldn't understand, but who was just as cold and just as helpless as she was. She sat up carefully, trying not to wake her parents. Through a crack in the curtain, she could see the faint outline of the native woman, still holding her baby, still trying to warm him with nothing but her own body heat. That's when Lily Mae made the decision that would test everything her family believed about survival, trust, and what it meant to be human in a world that seemed bent on freezing the kindness right out of people's hearts. But what she was about to do would set in motion events that none of them could have predicted, and the tribal people's response would shake everything the settlers thought they knew about those they called strangers. Lily Mae slipped out from under her blanket, like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden planks. The trading post was dark except for the glowing embers in the fireplace, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Her parents slept fitfully nearby, her father's arm draped protectively over her mother's shoulder. She crept toward the door, her precious blue blanket pressed against her chest. Her heart beat so hard she was sure to wake everyone, but the howling wind covered her movements. The heavy wooden door was cold to the touch, and she had to use both hands to raise the iron latch quietly. The moment she cracked the door open, the freezing air hit her like a punch. Snow immediately began pelting her face and hands, but she pushed forward anyway. There, huddled against the building side under a small overhang, sat the native woman with her infant. The woman looked up with surprise when she saw the small figure coming through the snow. Her dark eyes held exhaustion and fear, but also a fierce protection that reminded Lily May of her own mother. The baby in her arms was so motionless. It was terrifying. Lily May approached slowly, the way her father had shown her to approach scared animals. She held out her blanket with both hands, her small voice barely heard over the wind. The woman stared at her, confusion and weariness mixing in her face. Without saying anything, Lily May stepped closer and gently laid her blanket over the baby. The soft blue fabric immediately began covering the tiny form, and the woman's eyes went wide with shock. She looked from the blanket to the little girl's face, searching for some kind of trick or trap. But Lily May just smiled through her chattering teeth and pointed to the baby, then to the blanket. The universal language of a child's gesture needed no words. The woman's expression changed completely, tears starting to flow as she pulled the blanket closer around her child. Lily May? Her father's voice sliced through the storm like a whip. She turned to see Samuel standing in the doorway, his face showing both horror and rage. Behind him, Elena had woken up and was trying to understand what was happening. Get away from them right now. Samuel's voice carried a fear that made Lily May's stomach drop, but she didn't move. She couldn't. The baby's color was already starting to get better under her blanket, and the native woman was holding him tighter, whispering what sounded like prayers in her own language. Samuel rushed forward through the snow, but Elena grabbed his arm. Samuel, wait, look. The native woman was speaking now. Gentle words that none of them understood, but that carried the clear sound of gratitude. She lifted the baby slightly, showing them how the warmth was already helping. The child's breathing seemed stronger, his lips less frighteningly blue. Morrison appeared in the doorway, woken by the noise. "What in blazes is going on out here?" he demanded, then stopped short when he saw the scene. "Get that child inside before she freezes to death." "And you," he pointed at the native woman, "mind your own affairs." But something had changed in those few moments under the storm. The woman met Samuel's eyes directly, her own filled with a mix of desperate gratitude and fierce dignity. She spoke again, her voice stronger now, and though they couldn't understand her words, they could hear the feeling behind them. Lily May was shivering hard now, her thin nightgown no match for the brutal cold. Elena rushed forward and swept her daughter into her arms, carrying her back toward the warmth of the trading post. But Lily May kept looking back over her mother's shoulder at the woman and baby. Inside, Elena wrapped her daughter in Samuel's coat and held her close to the fire. "What were you thinking?" she whispered, though her voice held more amazement than anger. "You could have frozen to death out there." Samuel paced angrily, running his hands through his hair. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked, though his voice was softer than before. "That blanket was the only warm cover we had for you. And now," he gestured helplessly toward the door. But Lily May wasn't paying attention to his worries about practicality. She was thinking about how the baby's face had changed when the blanket covered him, how his mother's tears had looked different than the tears of sadness she'd been crying before. Outside, the wind kept howling, but something else was happening too. They could hear voices now, speaking in the native language, more than just the woman's voice. Other people had appeared in the storm, though where they had come from in this weather was a mystery. Morrison moved a window and peered out through the frost. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Looks like the whole tribe showed up." Samuel joined him at the window, his face going pale. In the swirling snow, they could see shapes moving, dark figures on horseback appearing like ghosts through the storm. At least a dozen of them, maybe more, all heading toward the trading post. Elena pulled Lily May closer, her heart racing. Had her daughter's kindness just put them all in terrible danger? Samuel's hand moved automatically toward his rifle, and Morrison was already reaching for his shotgun. But the native woman outside was calling out to the approaching figures, her voice carrying clearly despite the wind. She was holding up the blue blanket, showing it to them, speaking rapidly in words that sounded urgent and important. What none of the settlers inside could know was that word of the little girl's gift had already reached the tribal camp through ways they didn't understand. And what was coming through the storm wasn't a war party, but something far more meaningful. Something that would turn their beliefs about friendship, enemies, and the true meaning of survival completely upside down. The riders got off their horses in silence, their shapes emerging from the storm like spirits made real. Samuel gripped his rifle tighter, but something in how they moved made him pause. There was no aggression in their approach, no weapons ready. Instead, they formed a respectful circle around the woman and her baby. An older man stepped forward, his long gray hair whipping in the wind. Even through the storm, his presence demanded attention. He spoke to the woman in their shared language, his voice deep and calm. She responded quickly, holding up Lily May's blue blanket and pointing toward the trading post. Morrison cursed under his breath. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Now we've got a whole war party on our doorstep because your daughter couldn't keep to herself. But Elena was watching the scene more carefully. Look at them, Samuel. Really look. Does that look like a war party to you? She was right. The riders weren't arranged for battle. Instead, they seemed to be protecting the woman and child, creating a windbreak with their horses and bodies. Several of them had gotten down and were sharing their own blankets and furs, building a better shelter. The gray-haired man approached the trading post door slowly, his hands visible and empty. When he reached the entrance, he stopped and called out in heavily accented English, "We wish to speak with the child who gave warmth to our blood." Morrison looked ready to refuse, but Samuel surprised everyone by stepping forward. "She's just a little girl," he called back through the door. She didn't understand what she was doing. She understood exactly what she was doing. Came the reply, "May we come in?" The storm speaks too loudly for proper conversation. The question hung in the air like ice crystals. Morrison shook his head hard, but Elena was already moving toward the door. "Samuel, that baby could have died. Our daughter might have saved his life." "And now what?" Samuel demanded. "They come for payment? They take her as payment? We don't know what they want." But Lily May wiggled out her mother's arms and walked to the door. Despite her father's protests, she reached up and began to lift the latch. The adults were too shocked to stop her before she had opened the door wide. The gray-haired man looked down at her, his weathered face serious but kind. Behind him, the woman with the baby stepped forward, the child now wrapped safely in the blue blanket. The baby's color had returned to normal, and he was making soft sounds that spoke of comfort rather than pain. "You are very small to carry such a big heart," the man said to Lily May, his English careful but clear. The woman spoke rapidly to the man, gesturing between Lily May and her baby. The man nodded seriously, then looked back at the little girl. "Ayana says you saw her son dying and chose to save him with your own warmth. She says you gave away your protection from the cold to protect someone you had never met." Lily May nodded seriously, though she was shivering in the doorway. "He looked scared," she said simply. The man translated her words, and something rippled through the group of native people. Several of them exchanged looks that seemed to carry deep meaning. The gray-haired man knelt down to Lily May's eye level. "In our ways, such a gift carries great weight. When one saved the life of another, especially the life of a child, debts are created that must be honored." Samuel stepped protectively beside his daughter. "She doesn't want anything in return. She's just a child who didn't understand the consequences." The man stood slowly, his eyes moving from Samuel to Elena to Lily May. Understanding and consequences are different things. What your daughter did tonight will be remembered for many generations. But first, the immediate debt must be paid. He gestured to his people, and several of them began moving toward their horses. Samuel tensed, his hand moving back toward his rifle. But what happened next defied every expectation he had about how this encounter would unfold, because what the tribal people were preparing to do would challenge everything the settlers believed about generosity, honor, and the true meaning of giving back. In a land where survival often meant choosing between yourself and a stranger, the tribal people began unpacking bundles from their horses, moving with quiet efficiency despite the storm. Samuel watched in growing confusion as they produced items that seemed impossible to have in such harsh conditions. Thick furs, dried meat, what looked like medicinal herbs, and most surprisingly, a beautifully woven blanket that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. The gray-haired man, who the others clearly treated as a leader, directed the activities with subtle gestures. He spoke again to Samuel, his voice carrying over the wind. "I am Takakota. What your daughter did tonight cannot go unanswered. In our ways, a life debt must be honored immediately." "We don't want anything," Samuel said firmly, though his voice shook slightly. She gave the blanket freely. "Freely given, freely returned," Takakota replied, "but with honor as custom demands." Ayana, the young mother, approached with her baby still wrapped in Lily May's blue blanket. She spoke to Takakota in their language, her words urgent and emotional. The other tribal members listened carefully, several nodding with what appeared to be approval. Takakota turned back to the settlers. "Ayana wishes to speak, but her English is limited. She asked me to tell you that your daughter did not just save her son from the cold. She saved him from death itself. The child was slipping away, and without warmth, he would not have seen another sunrise." Elena gasped softly, pulling Lily May closer. The weight of what her daughter had done was becoming clear. This hadn't been just a kind gesture. It had been a matter of life and death. "She asks also that you understand something else," Takakota continued. "The baby your daughter saved is not just any child. He is the grandson of our eldest medicine woman, the great-grandson of a chief whose bloodline stretches back 7 generations. Your daughter saved not just a life, but a legacy." Morrison, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. "That's all very touching, but we're in the middle of a blizzard. Can't this wait until the storm passes?" Takakota's eyes fixed on Morrison with a stare that made the trading post owner take a step back. Honor cannot wait for convenient weather. A debt of this size demands immediate response. The tribal people had finished unpacking their bundles and were now arranging items in the snow near the trading post entrance. Despite the wind and cold, they worked with careful precision, creating what looked almost like a formal display. "We offer these gifts not as payment, for no payment could equal what was given," Takakota explained. "We offer them as recognition of the heart that beats in such a small chest." He gestured to the arranged items. Furs to keep the child warm for many winters, food to sustain her family through harsh times, medicine to protect her from illness, and this. He lifted the shimmering blanket. This was woven by our eldest grandmother, made from the wool of sheep that graze in the high meadows where the spirits walk. It carries blessings that will protect your daughter for all her days. Lily May stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder at the beautiful blanket. It seemed to catch light from sources that didn't exist, and even in the storm, it appeared to glow with its own inner warmth. But Samuel remained suspicious. "Why would you give so much for one blanket? What do you really want from us?" Takakota's expression grew serious. "You do not understand the weight of what happened here tonight. Your daughter looked at a dying child from a different people, with different ways, different words, different skin, and saw not a stranger, but a soul in need. In a world that teaches fear the different, she chose love." The wind seemed to quiet for a moment, as if even the storm was listening to his words. "Such hearts are rare in any people," Takakota continued. "They must be honored, protected, nurtured. What we give tonight is not payment, but recognition of something sacred." Elena found herself moved to tears, understanding finally that they were witnessing something profound. This wasn't just about the exchange of goods, or even the saving of a life. This was about the recognition of a spirit that transcended the boundaries that usually divided people. But as Takakota reached to hand the precious blanket to Lily May, another voice cut through the night, a harsh, angry voice that carried the sound of approaching horses and the promise of violence. Well, looks like we got ourselves a little Indian-loving party here." Everyone turned to see a group of rough-looking men emerging from the storm, their faces hard with the kind of hatred that had been poisoning the frontier for generations. And the leader of this group was looking at Lily May and her family with the kind of smile that promised nothing but trouble. Because sometimes when two worlds try to bridge their differences, there are always those who profit from keeping them apart. And they were about to discover just how far some people would go to preserve the hatred that divided the land. The newcomers rode to the storm like messengers of violence. Their leader, a scarred man with cold eyes and a sneer that spoke of years spent hating anything different from himself. Behind him rode 4 others, all armed, all carrying the same expression of barely contained aggression. Name's Garrett. The leader called out, not bothering to get off his horse. We heard tell there was some Indian trouble brewing at Morrison's place. Looks like we arrived just in time. Morrison stepped forward nervously. There's no trouble here, Garrett. Just folks waiting out the storm. Garrett's laugh was like broken glass. No trouble? I see a whole pack of savages surrounding white folks, and that looks like plenty of trouble to me. His eyes fixed on the gifts arranged in the snow. Looks like they're trying to buy something. Question is, what? Takakota remained perfectly still, but Samuel could see the subtle way the other tribal members shifted their positions. They weren't preparing to attack, but they were definitely preparing to defend. They're not buying anything, Samuel said, stepping protectively in front of his family. My daughter helped their child, and they're showing gratitude. Help their child. Garrett spat in the snow. You mean your little girl got herself involved with Indian business? That's not helping, friend. That's asking for trouble. Lily May, still holding her mother's hand, looked up at the angry man with confusion. She couldn't understand why someone would be upset about helping a baby who was cold. Ayana, sensing the danger, pulled her infant closer and spoke urgently to Takakota in their language. The old leader's expression darkened as he replied, but his voice remained calm and measured. We seek no conflict, Takakota said to Garrett. We came only to honor a debt and return kindness with kindness. Debt? Garrett laughed again. Only debt Indians understand is the one they owe for all the trouble they've caused. And the only payment worth taking is them getting as far away from decent folks as possible. One of Garrett's men spoke up. Maybe we should teach these savages what happens when they get too comfortable around white settlements. The tension in the air became electric. Samuel could feel it building like pressure before lightning strikes. Elena pulled Lily May behind her while Morrison backed toward his door, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. But it was Lily May who broke the standoff. She stepped out from behind her mother and walked directly toward Garrett's horse, her small voice cutting through the wind and hatred like a bell. Why are you so angry? She asked, looking up at him with genuine curiosity. They just wanted to say thank you for helping their baby. Garrett stared down at her, clearly not expecting such a direct question from a child. For a moment, his sneer faltered, replaced by something that might have been confusion. Get back, little girl, he said, but his voice had lost some of its venom. This isn't children's business. But it started with children's business, Lily May replied. Their baby was cold, so I gave him my blanket. Now they want to give me a blanket too. That seems fair. The simplicity of her logic hung in the air like a challenge to all the complicated hatred that had brought Garrett and his men through the storm. Here was a 6-year-old child reducing their conflict to its most basic elements. Someone was cold, someone else helped, and now help was being offered in return. Takakota watched this exchange with growing intensity, his eyes moving between the innocent child and the men who represented everything that made peace between their peoples so difficult. Your daughter speaks wisdom that shames grown men, he said quietly to Samuel. Perhaps it is time for the children to teach the adults. But Garrett's confusion was rapidly being replaced by something darker, and the way his hand moved toward his weapon suggested that he wasn't interested in lessons from children or wisdom from anyone. Because some people choose hatred so completely that even the innocence of a child becomes a threat to the darkness they've built their lives around. Garrett's hand hovered near his weapon, but something in Lily May's fearless gaze seemed to freeze him in place. The other settlers and tribal members watched in tense silence as a 6-year-old girl faced down a man whose reputation for violence stretched across 3 territories. You know what I think? Lily May continued, completely unaware of the danger she was in. I think you're cold too. And when people get really cold, sometimes they get angry instead of asking for help. The words hit Garrett like a physical blow. His scarred face twisted with emotions he clearly didn't want to feel. Behind him, His men shifted nervously, uncertain how to respond to a child who was treating their leader like any other person in need of understanding. Elena stepped forward to retrieve her daughter, but Takakota raised a subtle hand, stopping her. The old leader was watching something unfold that he recognized as significant beyond the immediate moment. "That's enough wisdom from children," Garrett snarled, his anger returning. "You people need to pack up this little friendship gathering and move along. Indians aren't welcome around decent folk." But as he spoke, something unexpected happened. The wind, which had been howling relentlessly for hours, began to calm. The snow that had been driving horizontally started to fall more gently. Through the clearing air, they could all see something that made everyone pause. In the distance, more lights were approaching, not the harsh torches of another war party, but the warm glow of lanterns carried by families, settlers from the surrounding area, drawn by reports of the storm and concern for their neighbors at the trading post. "Well now," Morrison muttered, "looks like we're about to have ourselves a real gathering." The approaching settlers included women and children, elders and young men, all bundled against the cold, but moving with purpose through the improving weather. As they drew closer, their lantern light illuminated the scene. Tribal people and settlers standing together around gifts laid out in the snow, with a small girl at the center of it all. Garrett saw them coming, and his expression grew uglier. Perfect. Now we got witnesses to this Indian-loving foolishness. But when the settlers arrived, their reactions weren't what Garrett expected. The first to reach them was an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, whose own granddaughter was about Lily May's age. "What's happening here?" she asked, looking around at the gathered people with curiosity rather than fear. "The little one saved our baby from the cold death," Ayana said suddenly, her English broken but understandable. She held up her infant, now warm and alert, in Lily May's blue blanket. She gave her covering so our son could live. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened as she looked from the baby to Lily May to the gifts arranged in the snow. "Land sakes, child, you saved this little one's life." Lily May nodded shyly, suddenly overwhelmed by all the attention. But other settlers were arriving now, and word of what happened was spreading quickly through the group. Instead of fear or anger, their faces showed something closer to wonder. "That's the most beautiful thing I've heard all winter," said another woman, her voice soft with emotion. A young father carrying his own small son stepped forward. "Takes real courage to give up your only warm covering for a stranger." Garrett saw his support evaporating before his eyes. These weren't hardened fighters looking for conflict. They were families, people who understood the value of kindness and the preciousness of children's lives. "You're all being fooled," he said desperately. "This is just Indian trickery. They're trying to make you soft so they can take advantage." But Takakota had been watching this entire exchange with growing understanding. He stepped forward and spoke directly to the gathered settlers. "Your child did something tonight that our people will remember for generations," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the calmer air. "She saw past the differences that divide us and acted from her heart. This is not trickery. This is a kind of spirit that could heal the wounds between our peoples." He gestured to his tribal members, who began to unpack more items from their horses. "We brought gifts not just for the child, but for all who shelter here. Food to share, medicines to heal, furs to keep families warm through the remaining winter." The settlers looked at each other in amazement. They had expected conflict, but instead found themselves witnessing something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the people they had been taught to fear. But Garrett wasn't finished. His face had turned red with fury, and his hand was now resting openly on his weapon. "This ends now," he growled. "I won't stand by and watch good white folks get poisoned by savage lies." The moment balanced on a knife's edge, with the potential for violence hanging heavy in the air despite the calming storm. Because sometimes the greatest threat to hatred isn't opposition, but the simple power of human connection. And some people will do anything to prevent that connection from taking root. What happened next would be talked about for decades in settlements across the territory. As Garrett's hand moved toward his weapon, every person present understood that they stood at a crossroads that would define not just this moment, but the future relations between their communities. But it was Mrs. Patterson who acted first. The elderly woman stepped directly between Garrett and the tribal people, her weathered hands planted firmly on her hips. "Garrett Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had helped raise half the children in 3 counties. "You put that hand away right now. There's been enough violence in this land to last 10 lifetimes, and I won't see it started over a child's act of kindness." Other settlers began to move, not away from the confrontation, but closer to it. They formed a loose circle around Lily Mae and the tribal people, their lanterns creating a warm glow that pushed back both the darkness and the cold hatred that Garrett represented. "These people came in peace," said the young father, shifting his own child to his other arm. "They came to honor what our little girl did. If we can't respect that, what kind of people are we?" Garrett looked around desperately, seeking support among his men. But even they seemed uncertain now. Faced with families, children, and elders rather than armed opponents, their appetite for violence was fading. Takakota stepped forward slowly, his hands visible and empty. "I have lived through many seasons of conflict," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "I have seen what hatred costs both our peoples. Tonight, a child showed us another way." He gestured to Lily Mae, who was watching everything with wide, serious eyes. She did not see an Indian baby or a white baby. She saw a child in need, and she acted from her heart. Perhaps it is time for the adults to learn from such wisdom. The tribal leader reached into his coat and withdrew something that made everyone gasp. It was a peace pipe carved from white stone and decorated with intricate symbols. In our tradition, this pipe is used to seal agreements between peoples. Tonight, I offer to smoke it with any who would choose peace over conflict. Samuel found himself stepping forward before he fully realized what he was doing. "I'll smoke with you," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "My daughter showed more courage tonight than I've shown in years." One by one, other settlers stepped forward. Mrs. Patterson, the young father. Even Morrison emerged from his trading post to join them. Only Garrett and his men remained apart, isolated by their hatred. Takakota lit the pipe with ceremony and reverence, then passed it to Samuel. As the 2 men shared the sacred smoke, something profound shifted in the air around them. The storm had passed. The stars were beginning to appear. And for the first time in memory, 2 communities that had been divided by fear and misunderstanding found themselves united by the simple actions of a 6-year-old girl. Ayanna approached Lily Mae and carefully wrapped a magnificent woven blanket around her shoulders. The child looked up at her with a smile that needed no translation, and Ayanna smiled back, tears freezing on her cheeks. Garrett turned his horse and rode away into the night, his men following reluctantly. His hatred had found no purchase here, defeated not by force, but by the simple power of human decency. As the 2 communities began to share food and stories around a fire built from contributions of both peoples, Lily Mae sat wrapped in her new blanket, watching adults learn what she had always known: that when someone is cold, you give them warmth, and when someone shows kindness, you respond with kindness. The little blue blanket she had given away was returned to her that night, but she had gained something far more valuable. She had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change the world, one heart at a time. And in the years that followed, when the story was told and retold, people would say that the peace between the communities began not with treaties or agreements, but with a 6-year-old girl who saw a freezing baby and chose love over fear. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and compassion collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.